host, we're going to introduce our good friend, MPH, otherwise known as Marilyn. Marilyn, thank you so much for hosting this first session, and I'm going to turn it over to you.
Sounds good, Jeff. Thank you so much. How's my audio, guys?
Great.
Sounds fine.
All right, fantastic. Let me get it set up here. And hopefully you can see my screen. And as we kick off the day, wanted to express our gratitude for the sponsors who have made today possible. And also a special thanks to Ward Crispin for doing these events over the years and for providing the value that you do, Ward, to our community. Just thank you. You've touched so many lives with the dedication and commitment that you've made to the ecosystem. So thank you so much. And thank you to Jeff Wald for being the MC for today. So it's always an honor to be in any kind of event with you, and just truly do appreciate it. So with that being said, what I'd like to do is go ahead and crack on. And today's session, it's interesting, the registrations that we have come through. I think we've struck a nerve here in terms of the topic. And so today what we're going to be talking about is the top challenges that HR and WorkTech companies face when opening new markets. And moderating your session here today is yours truly, MPH, Marilyn Pearson Hendricks, and I am the co-founder of WorkTech Advisory Incorporated. I hail sometimes from Minneapolis, the center of the United States, by the way. We'll joke about that later, but I also co-locate out in Florida during non-hurricane months and when it's really cold here. And colleagues that I have joining me today include Kate Heath, who is our Senior Vice President of Client Strategy and Solution, who hails from London, England, in the United Kingdom. And we have Kirsten Robinette. She is our go-to-market strategist, hailing from Los Angeles. And so just a little bit about us is we wouldn't be a proper consultancy, if you would, without a go-to-market model, if you would. And so I'd like to share with you just a quick overview of WorkTech Advisory. We are a global management consulting firm dedicated to supporting HR Tech and WorkTech founders and their senior leadership teams to better understand what they're selling, to whom, why, for how much, and how you're positioning yourselves in the ecosystem. The business problems we solve for our clients include laying the foundation for opening new markets and revenue streams, taking control of your position in the ecosystem, competitive differentiation, addressing pricing uncertainty, and sales effectiveness. So, diving into our session for today, the challenges of opening new markets. What happened, just a little backstory, is we were really inspired to host the session to illuminate some of the key areas that we have personally experienced in our School of Hard Knocks collectively, and that we've also witnessed others struggle with. And the objective here of today's session is really to lay the foundation for thinking about the planning aspects of opening up new markets, and in keeping with the collaboration zone and the spirit of the collaboration zone, we would really like to invite you to participate, your experiences, your insights, and your lessons learned in this session today. We're going to put some structure around it, but again, what we'd really like you to do is feel comfortable chiming in. Now, what we have here today is we've got, we typically have a pretty active chat session. So if you'd feel comfortable putting your comments and your ideas or thoughts or inspiration into chat, by all means. And we've got Kirsten, she's going to be moderating the chat, and Jeff Wald will chime in if we miss anything. Another option for you too is if you want to go ahead and use the raise the hand feature. But we'd like to invite you to come in off of video if you choose, come in on audio if that's your choice. but we would really like to have your input and ideas in learning. We're leading the panel, but we're really a panel of peers, and there's a ton of brain power in this room, and we'd like to be able to really take this unique opportunity for a forum of exchange, of learning, and of sharing. So with that, we'd like to again invite you to be part of our discussion here today. So what we are doing is we are taking a page from the old David Letterman top 10 list. We're changing it up just a little bit, but what we're looking at is the range of challenges to be considered and addressed by executives whose ambition it is to open up new markets. And you know, if you would, the topic of alliances and channels and partnerships, oh my, that we're focusing on here today, that tends to be a key area of that's utilized in go-to-market. And but within the context of that, there's a whole range of broader business decisions that are involved in ultimately leveraging that option as well as more. So what we want you to take away from today's session is really a more comprehensive view of, again, the business challenges that should be considered. And so that we can put in place, hopefully, the best mitigation strategies as possible. All right, so unlike David Letterman, who would make you wait for all of the top 10 list items, what we wanted to do is tell you what we're gonna talk about. So hopefully this will be compelling so that you choose to stick around or really become part of the conversation here today. And so what we want to do is explore market choice, sales approach, legal and regulatory requirements. And this is a worthy of a session itself, that the whole challenge of building awareness in your new market, potentially competitive landscape differences, and then the obvious of language, time zone, and cultural challenges, but they oftentimes, 2020 hindsight, become more than we've ever anticipated. We'd like to talk a little bit about investor experience. And then we're going to have a little bit of fun here with some assumptions as we close out our session that we wanted to challenge a bit about coming to the USA, if that is something that you're considering right now, and then also underestimating in-country advantage. Kate, I don't know if you wanted to punctuate anything here before I hand the podium back over to you.
No, thanks, Marilyn. I think really the key here is they're all really important, but some take priority in order of when you need to be addressing them. But generally, you know, the hindsight, as Marilyn said, this kind of 2020 hindsight, the more you put up front, the more consideration that goes into play, and mitigating these challenges prior to opening a new market, the more successful you're going to be. And I think I reiterate what Marilyn has just said. It would be incredible to have the conversation today. So, rather than just presenting, to actually hear your views. What challenges have you come across? I will pose some questions, so please don't be shy. We welcome you to have a voice at the table.
Thank you so much, Kate. All right, number 10 here, we'll go in reverse order, is making the right choice about which new market to open. Kate.
Yeah, so thank you. This is really, it is geographical to many degrees, and you could be looking at changing your entire market focus, and you could be looking at taking a shift in terms of vertical focus, but really in this perspective, it's looking at the geographical focus and what geographical differences do we need to really be considering. So, what's prompting that need? What are the typical drivers for looking at those new markets? And we find a lot of companies, they play locally and they play really well locally, and then they start to expand that locality to a neighboring geography because it's comfortable and it's familiar. But we know also that in the world and in the market right now, the real favorites are tending towards expansion into the US and into Canada for that kind of level of exploration. And my experience of working with organizations is the immediate is we want to go big, we want to go better. But sometimes actually take that time to have a further look at the geographies around you of where are the most appropriate markets. We also need to consider that solutions that people have are built for local markets. They're built for something more local. So is it suitable for an international market? And when you start to build up lots of layers of different technologies to make your market expansion and your go-to-market strategy work, you can sometimes be impacting those single source of truth, which is, obviously an incredibly important facet. So having that alignment, having that significant alignment of where your strategy is going to be, you can't underestimate that. So, some of the questions that I would pose would be, what should we be analyzing before making any go-to-market decisions? Are we looking at what are those drivers that are sitting behind reaching for new markets? And I'd be interested to know if anybody has got any experience in those fields, if what decisions should be made prior to be making a choice of market.
Yeah, just to punctuate that a little bit, again, we certainly invite you to join in on the conversation, raise your hand, put a note in chat. But sometimes some of the conversations that we've been involved with or have gone through ourselves is, if an organization, company has had a certain amount of success in another geographic theater other than the US, and then kind of proved out a concept, is the US the next move? Or do you go to another country and like the UK as an example, right? And what are some of the considerations that might go into that decision?
And we will cover a number of these as we go through the topics and through all the items. They all start to build up a picture of the right geography, the right concept to take forward into that geography as well.
Yeah, and so, all right, sounds good. So anyway, getting our juices flowing for today. So as we were preparing our materials for our session today, we realized that we could spend our whole entire session on this next topic. And what this has to do with is selecting and implementing the right sales approach. Number 9, selecting and implementing the right sales approach to opening up a new market. So let me play the movie a little bit. It's like, all right, so we want to come to the United States and we have our MVP done and we need some strategic introductions and we just want to get in front of somebody, right? And we're based in another country. So that's one scenario, right? Where we have some capability, right? And are we going to be able to close our initial accounts here in the United States? Or do we look and investigate some channel possibilities for potentially being able to come along, if you would, to augment the capability of another product or service offering with what it is that we do. So that's a real common use case that we run into as we're evaluating these types of questions with founders and their senior leadership teams. Kate, are there others that come to mind?
Now, I think when you're looking at different sales approaches, it's really taking an internal look. So what's working for you from an internal perspective? Where are you having successes? Where can you replicate those successes out to a alternative geography? And also, there are some very, very stark differences in terms of when you're looking at an indirect strategy, for example. There are different geographies within the world that are very adept and very mature in their ability to partner and have a partner network, where there are also some geographies that this is still very, very juvenile, very new. So really understanding that, and therefore that takes quite a lot of work internally for you to make sure, have we got the resource? Have we got the right people, the right strategy? Do we need to go out and source all of those strategies and those right sales techniques in order to then implement, to be able to then move that into a alternative geography? So it's a much bigger, as Marilyn said, this is a massive topic that can take a long time to discuss, and there's a lot of content to it. But really, it's making sure, are we doing the right strategy? Is it the right sales approach? Are we implementing it in the right way? Is it going to hit the right market in the right fashion that we need it to be addressing?
Right. One of the things that on that note, Kate, one of the things that I've observed is in other geographic theaters, there's a collection and a network of independent resellers, and it's quite mature. Central and South America as one example, and or also perhaps in the UK and in Europe. In HR Tech and in WorkTech, people who are coming over and looking for that and saying, who can I sign up for to actually distribute my, the gifts that I have for the buyers in this market that solve the problems that exist that we want to solve. There isn't really, and it would be interesting to get a pulse check of people in this room that might have a different experience certainly than I do or we do, but there isn't necessarily these independent resellers that you can sign up and necessarily take that on. Right. So what we've found is some pretty distinct geographic differences in what the idea of alliances and channels really means, and the assumptions that you come to the table with. And in fact, what I sometimes see happening with founders and senior leaders, particularly early stage organizations, is they're looking for somebody. Will you sell my offering? I'll pay you 20% commission. And I've not seen that be very successful, unless I get really lucky and found just the right individual at the right point in time. I don't know. I'd like to open it up to the floor. Is there anyone in the U.S. that has found an independent? There's one that I kind of know of that's emerging to take on that a little bit out of the Hexa portfolio. But again, just wondering if it's just me or if anybody has found a group that does that in the U.S. Katrina.
Well, yeah, I mean, I get those offers all the time. People think they're very, very excited to offer me a percentage of every sale that I refer with no base. And it's just not something that, and it's a lot of companies that are coming from Europe and want to enter the US. I think another thing that I've seen in the market is that, people want to sign up channel partners or referral partners. And I think, well, even if they do have the best thing in the market, a lot of the consultants get paid based on what they sell. So if you're offering 5% for a referral and other companies are offering 30, guess which one they're going to bring up to their clients. I mean, it's not true of everyone, but you're paid on what you sell. You're going to bring up the one that maybe fills your own pockets the best, and maybe the other one's a little bit better, but not better enough for me to suffer personally. Right. As a consultant.
Yeah.
Yes, I said it out loud.
Yeah, no, that's interesting perspective, Katrina. This is Kristen Menard, because I found a lot of consultants don't want to take any money, right? They want to remain as agnostic as possible. So while the referral agreement opportunities are lucrative or could potentially be lucrative, from an HR tech stack standpoint, they're like, look, I want to be a consultant, right? I don't want to sell product, and I'll recommend where it's applicable. But I found, in my prior experience, they don't move the needle. So like Ward just posted, US market for HR tech industry has 3 max who are true resellers. Like, I'm curious who those might be. And if anybody thinks there are others, because, MPH, I think you hit the nail on the head. There's no clearly defined, ecosystem of resellers.
It's interesting. I was in Mexico City in 2019 at an event, and with a very large service provider or large SaaS provider in the space. And it was so interesting just to see how many businesses were out there that actually they were value-added resellers. They did do consulting, and they did actually write contracts. And if you think call it SAP has done historically with their offerings, they have developed that around, the big players in some cases have developed their own, call it specialized practices where consulting houses do actually offer and write paper. But what I haven't seen here that I've seen in other geographic theaters is this idea of the VARs that are looking for the next new solution provider, right? The next new eightfold, if you would, that they can build their practices on. We're behind here in the US. It doesn't really exist that I have seen. All right, we've got a couple of questions, it looks like, in chat here. We've got Chris chiming in. It says, I guess your partner could be larger Southwest SaaS providers that you plug into, or service providers, outsourcers that use your HR Tech to deliver their service. Yeah, definitely agree. Any other thoughts here on this topic? Maybe just from a channel chief perspective, if we think about it that way, the idea, I always cringe a little bit, even with the use of the word channel, because it can happen, but it happens a little bit more over time. But it's really, I think in the United States, it ends up being about selling together and going to market together and reducing friction in the motion, rather than setting up somebody who's just gonna, I just get them a cut of the deal, enable them to some degree, and all of a sudden the money is gonna magically start falling into play. So again,
yeah, and I think just chiming in as well, I think any sales approach, there was a question there that, going into a new market, do you go direct or indirect or hybrid? It's a very valid point and a very valid question. You can just go completely indirect, but you do have to make sure that you know who your kind of partner, what partner profiles are you looking to align with. It's really important to manage that alignment. And it's also any kind of real partnership that you go into, whether that's, a reseller, a referral, it takes time to evolve those relationships to make sure they are truly meaningful, to deliver the right sales approach and to deliver the right level of credibility that you're wanting to achieve within the market. So I think there are definitely some geographical differences that, UK, Europe have got some really strong independent resellers and a really solid partner network. US may not have such the same level. There are variations. So it's really identifying what approach you want to take, what your ideal partner profile really starts to look like, and then doing your research into finding the right type of partnerships that you want to have for a reseller, for a referral. What type of partnership are you looking for in that channel alliance?
Right. And so this could be a good double click too, to think about this question in the context of the panels that are going to be on taking place throughout the rest of the day today. So this is a carry forward of that. But again, we're not going too deep into solutioning here, but the word of advice, if we were to offer some takeaways for those that are facing this kind of decision or these choices in the future, is building out your own internal sales capability, at least in the US geographic market, becomes table stakes. A humble opinion. So, all right, with that, let's go ahead and crack on and talk a little bit about some other things that we should be thinking about from a business perspective as we're planning on opening up new markets. And at number 8, what we've got is legal and regulatory requirements will be different, right? I don't know if Kate, you had a few things to to add on to this point here?
Yeah, I think sometimes they're such important requirements, yet they are quite easily overlooked because there is an assumption that the way we're doing business today is the way we can do it wherever we go. And yes, there are obviously going to be some small requirements that are needed to be changed, but actually there is a really solid piece of work to actually understand your ability to do business within a different geography. Doing business in the US, doing business in the UK, doing business in Germany and France, for example, they're all different in their regulatory requirements, and they have fairly strict requirements as well. So some of the questions are really, do you take that on yourself? Or do you go out and find an organization like an EOR who can do that for you, who can support you? And depending on the size of your organization as well, if you're a high growth startup, it's scaling really quickly, you may not have all that capacity and time to be able to go out and source your own information and set up your own entities. They are costly, they take time, and processes are really long around that. And we also relate this to being what people deem as enterprise ready. And it's a term I hear a lot. We're enterprise ready, we're great for this. But actually, what does that really mean? There's a lot of ISO standards that you need to have in play. You need to make sure that you're legally meeting all those requirements. But we always thought that large enterprises needed you to be enterprise ready, but actually some of the SMBs are really looking for this kind of being enterprise ready, being able to actually do it. So some of the things that I look at, do you in-house this, do you outsource it? They're some of the real kind of critical decisions that need to be considered and evaluated depending on the geography that you are looking to enter in from a new market perspective.
Right. I mean, to punctuate that a little bit, GDPR is a big one.
Yes.
US, we're not as particular about those things, although that's changing, right? We've got state level regulations. And it is interesting to see the whole category you brought up, Kate, of the employer of record, because that of course falls into HR Tech and WorkTech, and it is something that was a real growth area and probably will continue to be as a result of what happened during the pandemic. Well, I want to be able to work from another country. What does that look like, right? So it's really interesting to see that whole category grow. So
yeah, exactly. And you are really supporting a very vast remote workforce that is looking to do remote, even hybrid working. So you're going to have to be able to manage that from a payroll and contracts perspective.
Right. For the founders and the senior leaders who are looking at sales capability as an example, I'm thinking, do we make the investment of an in-country sales representative, given that they're ready, the step is ready for that? It can make those decisions a little bit easier potentially than in the past. So I encourage you to definitely look at your other HR Tech and WorkTech providers in that regard. And there's definitely a lot of choices, including people that have registered. We've got some logos that have signed up for today's session that are in that category. Encourage you to do some networking there as well. Moving on, this is another topic that we can dedicate a whole session to, but it'd be interesting to get you guys' views on this, given your own personal experience and what you've faced in your past. But what we're seeing is that some of the challenges for the founders and senior leaders is, and I'm thinking more specifically in the US, is the level of investment required to build any degree of awareness is significantly beyond what is oftentimes anticipated. And so what do you do with that? What do you do with, we're coming to the US because it's a giant addressable market, but then what's the downside of that? And what do we do about it? So it would be interesting to dive deeper into this a little bit. I mean, obviously we can sign up for more webinars. We can get a booth at at the HR Tech show. We can spend a lot of money on advertising or buy Google AdWords. It's limitless the number of options that we would have in terms of spending money, right? But those the building of awareness for those initial steps in a new market.
And I think, Marilyn, as well, the concept of, we see a lot of people go down the freemium route. So, positioning themselves for that new market with a free trial, a free period, or a lesser of their tech, so that it becomes a free version of it. And actually, is that the right route to go down? Does that build that level of trust and association and brand kind of quality and equity that you really need within a new geography?
What do you guys think of the freemium models? Friend or foe? Fan or not? We don't have a poll here, but be interesting to get your views if you want to participate in chat or not, because there's,
I have a
Yeah, go ahead,
I think that in
Katrina.
enterprise, it's a little bit more difficult because they can't really experience a lot of times the full product unless they're integrated. And so it takes a while to get to the point where the freemium or the free trial is going to actually let them see the potential of it all. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Like there's a lot of work that goes into an enterprise solution and integrating it into their stack so they can experience the ideal way it should be experienced, whatever it is.
Yeah. And you bring up a really good point. Is pricing in segments like enterprise, is pricing really what's holding you back? Or are there other factors in that, which is a whole nother topic in and of itself? But giving away something for free doesn't mean necessarily it's going to be more successful or faster.
Yeah.
So, or even products that have very, very low overhead on implementation and enterprise. Oftentimes it's more the change management and adoption and getting buy-in for that decision that are the stakeholdering are bigger points of friction than the actual price itself. And so yeah, that's free. In one of my former mentors, they referred to it as the F word in enterprise. Sorry to be a little provocative today. Get your attention. Come back from multitasking. All right. Anything, comments that would be fun to riff on here for a moment? Just calling out.
I think we've got a bit of
comment here. Go
a
ahead.
little bit of network going on here in the chat, but yeah, there's definitely been some comments about freemium models, and it doesn't look like we're fans in the chat.
Yeah, we've got people that have been through multiple go-to-markets, maybe tried that, been there, done that, had some battle scars, some hatchet marks. But beware if that is a solution that you're looking at least for HR Tech and WorkTech. It could be that other segments, right, MarTech or FinTech, that would make a lot of sense. So some of the challenges would be taking things that work in other markets and applying them to this segment and thinking that it translates if we were to add in another one. All right. Let's go ahead and tackle another topic that's pretty fun now that we're starting to get warmed up here, is organizations that have had success in other global theaters. You've been at it for a while. Let's say it's really, really rocking in, insert country here. And now you want to go into the UK or the US as an example. The competitive landscape could vary considerably, right? It would be lovely to open this up for discussion on some experiences maybe that you've had in this regard, right? The total landscape, who you're in the battle with, what the conversation looks like, could be just a complete and total difference.
Yeah, and I think to add to that, Marilyn, you have those very dominant players. Your competitive landscape, where you are, the key players. A lot of them have got deep pockets to make sure they retain their rankings in there. But when you start to actually evaluate the landscape that you're about to enter into, you will have a lot of local players there. They've already got some pretty decent credibility. And this comes down to culture and language, which we'll get to shortly, because they all have a real bearing on how you operate, who you operate, and how you play and work with people. And also you've got to consider that when you're looking at the competitive landscape, the people that you're competing against in a different geography, you know, they may already be set up in terms of how they're going to recruit and retain the right talent to be able to support them, to take them further. You know, how they're going to partner, who they're partnering with to improve, and you know, the impact and the cohesion that they have with their customer base and their future customer base. So it would be you've got to be very mindful to make sure that you are really considering that the competition you have today is not going to be the competition in the same form that you will have within a new go-to-market landscape.
Right. I mean, one of the things that we are seeing as well is solution providers and SaaS providers who've had a lot of investment that has been made in capability. The platform can do a lot of things, but in opening up a new market, the portraying all of that capability may not be the right thing to do. It could be that one super special thing that is very unique in that platform is really what we shine the spotlight on. In other words, defeaturing can be very helpful in differentiating when there is a lot of competition. Right. So, you know, we've watched how many generations of ATS providers, how many generations of HRMS providers, and they still keep coming. Right. And it's always interesting to see that evolution just continue to march on. Just when you think it's over and done and nobody else is going to be in the category, who's going to knock Workday off of its podium? I believe it will happen in our lifetime. And so that will be interesting to see. All right, let's crack on and tackle another topic. And it's related to the competition here. We've already started going into this, but challenge number 5 is the buyer behavior will not be the same in your new market. Any thoughts or battle scars on this topic? We could talk a little bit about some of the geographic differences. Katrina, go ahead, please. Oh, you're on mute.
Yeah, I know. I tried not to talk on mute today. I know one thing, like I'm from Maine, and so it's like Mainers like to buy stuff from Maine. And I think that kind of a similar thing happens in certain countries where they're more comfortable buying from somebody who's based in their country. So you might have an uphill battle if you're trying to, you know, sell into a culture where they don't like to buy American company stuff or whatever it is, you know, that sort of thing. So
right.
It's not, you know,
really
it might be not
part.
as easy to sell into the US because we're so skeptical.
Right. And then one of the questions too is like, how much does the ideal customer profile change in the use case in the new market? Right. And so again, we're thinking a little bit, our heads right now in this discussion are a little bit more on the geography side of things. It certainly can apply if you're going from a vertical as well, from one to the next. So let's say you've achieved a certain amount of dominance in one vertical and are solving for a very specific use case, opening that, which would be great if you are, by the way, but opening that up for a new market. The word of advice is being very aware that you're likely going to have a change. And do you know what the new motion needs to be? Do you know what you're looking for? How has that changed? So we've got cultural different. Yeah, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I mean, it kind of goes into number 4 in some respects, and yeah, I'm conscious that we're in the kind of last 15 minutes of the session, so want to make sure that we cover a number of these items for you. But having that your ideal customer profile and the buyer that you have it will be similar, but it will have some very, very nuanced differences that have to be considered. And I think that's the factor. And Katrina, you raised an interesting point around, you like to buy from the people you know. I mean, there are some really interesting stats, which I'll get to when we move forward, just in terms of, how people actually buy and how they like to talk to people who are within the same geography. They use the same kind of language as well. So it is a really interesting factor around cultural differences and tech expectations and the support processes that you put around them as well to support your buyer within the new market.
Yeah, and the other thing to punctuate here, certainly in this may be true more broadly, but we use the word buyer as a singular, but even in outside of enterprise in mid-market, if you would, in the US, there's typically a committee-based group of stakeholders, even for very specific point solutions. So we've got, who's going to play all of the various roles that you would have in understanding, quote, that buyer as a collective, rather than just as necessarily a singular head of talent acquisition or head of learning and development. Typically, they're stakeholdering much more broadly. It's not usually them that's singularly that's making that one decision. So,
and just on that point as well, Marilyn, you are likely also to come across your buyer or your buyers that won't all just be within that one geography. They may be within a number of different geographies. Therefore, they have different buying expectations, and you have to consider a multitude of behaviors in order to meet the requirement to be able to sell to the buyer. So it's just, this is where the backstory, the research comes into play to make sure you know what you're going forward with, knowing what personas are you selling to? What are your buyer personas?
Right. And the compelling events that are driving the behavior of those personas. And obviously we can't do good marketing unless we really understand this, but taking the time to do that and go through that is definitely table stakes. We've touched on this next item, number 4, language, time zone, and cultural challenges. Oh my. But as you move from another global theater into your new market, or explore moving, if your change that you're going through is a vertical, or opening up, if you would, a alliance and partnership revenue stream that involves geographic boundary crossing. I think it's always more, it intellectually, but how does that really work? I guess that would be a way of, the intellectual side of things, and then the reality pill of making that happen. I don't know, Kate, what's been your experience here?
Yeah, and so I mean, I've worked within the UK, I've worked within the US, I've worked within Canada, and I've worked in some of the Asian Pacific geography. So I see totally that there is a language difference, absolutely. But it's not just about overcoming the language barrier, it's also about how you use that language. So, there are, just under 6,500, 7,000 languages spoken, worldwide. When you start to look at how you're utilizing the words that you're using, English UK and English US are very different languages. They're spoken, but they're very different in the way they are interpreted, the level of formality that sits around it. There are geographies where it's incredibly formal, the way you're going to work with somebody, and there are others which is very casual. So having that awareness, and I saw that there's James, you put a comment in the chat that having challenges selling US-based clients from a UK-based team, and some of the team are starting to put on accents. Absolutely, we see this happening. And it is about how you communicate, the tone that you're using, the language that you're using, working in the right time zone. If you're not available for 50% of somebody's business hours, that's going to have a fairly significant impact, I would imagine. Maybe not depending on the level of your business and how you're working it, but I would say that has a fairly significant impact.
Yeah. But yeah, that's the word of planning, if that's what we're thinking about here as the theme for our session is definitely take these into account, as well from the quality of life from a staffing perspective too. If you're going from the UK into North America as an example, right? What is the quality of life for your people going to be, in terms of hours, right? So it may affect the level of commitment or have some unintended consequences in that regard. So word to the wise. One thing that we wanted to share too, and we'll put a copy of our deck out in the HRTA platform. We'll put a PDF out there for you. But if you really want to go deep into the cultural difference topic, there's some academics that actually have done a lot of research on cultural differences, and there's a cool little tool that you can use, hofstedinsights.com, and you can actually put the countries in there and you can compare some dimensions of cultural measurements. So if it's something that you might like, how do we really compare, Israel to the United States? What are some of the key differences, at least that they, can understand from a concept perspective? It could start to get you thinking and anticipating, and there's probably some training if you're doing knowledge transfer and you're going to leverage the team that you have in country to your next geographic marketplace, right? What are some high level things at least to be aware of from a cultural differences perspective? Because it can be definitely a point of friction in your go-to-market. All right, number 3. So we wanted to share with you a little bit here what we've observed in terms of challenges, but what in our space of HR Tech and WorkTech, the challenge of having investors who lack go-to-market experience in 2 areas. Well, number 1, in the chosen geography where you're going into, and in HR Tech and WorkTech sector. So if you've got, your choice of your partners in this regard will have an impact on your ability to plan and the success and the assumptions that are there. So if you've got a investor who had a proper SaaS exit from Spain in fintech, how much of that transfers into the US? Some could be very, very valuable. In fact, there could be some creative plays that you might not, that we might not even think of because we're, too in our own head. But what we found in terms of challenges here is, and some of you guys, some of the professionals here and execs on this call may have had some experience with this directly in your past, but the assumptions and the guidance that is coming from and directive that is coming from your investors and what their paths are do have an impact on the go-to-market and opening up new markets, and even what order that is going to be tackled on, and the level of funding that is needed. So it'd be interesting to get your take, Jeff, here on this as someone who's been a serial entrepreneur in this regard. Just riffing with you for a second.
We'll tell you this is an endemic challenge. I see so many different people that kind of come in, and when I say, how are you going to go to market? They're just like, well, we're going to sell. I'm like, to whom? Like, what is the persona? What are the channels? What is your process? I was on the phone with an entrepreneur yesterday in the HR tech space, and he just said, look, I don't know if I'm selling to the head of DEI or the CHRO. I was like, that's a problem. Like, you need to know who your persona is, who the decision maker is. All of those are so important in kind of this go-to-market motion of understanding who you're trying to generate leads from. How do you get leads? How do you convert those to opportunities? How do you then get an SDR function, an AE function to get to a close, to get to an upsell and a renewal? That motion is what investors look for. And being able to show that you've built a machine is paramount.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think having, they look at team, they look at product, they look at sales and marketing approach, they look at that scalability of an organization. So, that absolutely was very succinctly put.
They also look at people that only have 5 minutes left. They are very focused on that. They're very focused on 5 minutes.
All right. And this is where we get into the fun part here. So in our 5-minute warning. The other thing too is, and we've run into this with our founders and senior leaders, is it's hard not to. We're guilty of this in the US too. But assuming that the USA is really like how it's portrayed in the movies and media. I mean, Jeff, you're overlooking, Central Park in New York City. And others might think that New York is the center of the United States. I'm in the center of the United States, which is in Minneapolis, right? So
Geographically correct.
Yes,
Geographically correct.
geographically.
Sure.
But the Kardashians are royalty, if you would. And what we've got here is really 50 countries in many respects. And so one of the things that we found in working with our clients is it's surprising how it happens in the moment and the flow of things, but just the set of assumptions that we come to the table with culturally, and what does that really translate into in terms of buyer behavior, in terms of persona, in terms of the cultural norms, and how different are we in business than it might look on, Netflix or TV, right? And so, but we got to start from somewhere, right? So anyway, so it's a little playful challenge here that be on guard from a planning perspective and from the go-to-market motion and from the machinery that is being set up and from your employees and staffing and from a business perspective, that how it works culturally is not necessarily like it might be portrayed in Hollywood. And yeah, so I don't know if anyone else has anything else to add here before we get down to our number one and then our wrap up. All right. People will be sharing latest. Oh, did you see this on Netflix in chat? Feel free to put in a good one there too, if there is one. And Katrina, you brought this up earlier, I think, in one of your comments. And I think there is, again, for founders that have had, and the leadership teams that have had geographic success in other theaters, and then they're making a transition into a new market, just underestimating the tailwind that you have with that and the in-country advantage and how much headwind you'll experience when that goes away. So that would be, from a planning perspective, just wanted to basically bookmark that for anyone that's going through this exercise or listening to this recording in the future, that keeping that in mind as you go through your business planning and setting that up would be a piece of advice. So just a recap of our topics that we've discussed here today. So we've talked about market choice. And again, these are not necessarily discrete. They're oftentimes interconnected. But as you're planning for a new market entry or opening up new channels and alliances and so forth, be thinking about the market choice, be thinking about the sales approach, the machinery, and having success with the machinery and the motion that you're going through. Understanding the legal and regulatory requirements, both from, call it, an employer perspective, also from a go-to-market perspective. And Kristen, thanks for your comments in chat. Those are really, really wise. The building of awareness and what's involved in being wise and efficient in your approach there, and understanding that there will be competitive landscape differences, understanding what those are, buyer behavior, cultural differences, investors, assumptions, and in-country advantages. So with that, we'd like to close this out. Thank you. Connect with us. We'll be at HR Tech in September. And back to you, Jeff.